It's a brotherhood, and it's this very special tie that binds us together.
Ken and I have rock climbed together since we were children.
Speaking of children, my cute baby face. This is me 11 years ago narrating the original show. I think I was really into Backstreet Boys at the time with that haircut, something like that. Anyway, it's almost hard to put into words how special this sport is for Ken and I. Well, on May 18th, 2006, we set out to climb Colorado's Black Canyon. It's a 2,000-foot wall, and it's considered one of the most dangerous climbs in North America. So Ken and I are expert free climbers, and we got into this thing knowing it was going to be pretty daunting, but we had extreme confidence we were going to conquer it. Now, the Black Canyon is difficult before the climbing even begins because you need to descend into the canyon. It is notoriously steep, full of loose rock, full of poison ivy, and there's actually places where there's sheer walls you have to rappel, which means to descend down ropes just to get into the canyon. Well, after a full day's hike, we got up on the rocks, our first look at this incredible 2,000-foot wall that we'd be facing. And we had an overwhelming feeling of confidence, even though we knew we would be facing things we'd never done before. We were going to conquer this thing. So Ken and I are expert free climbers, which means that we use only our hands and our feet to grip tiny cracks that are in the rock. We have ropes, harnesses, and anchor points that are there to catch us in case we fall. But truly, we need to rely on each other to stay alive. Now, there's two different roles in rock climbing. There's the lead climber and there's the belayer. The lead climber goes first, and it's the most dangerous point because they're the ones that can take a fall. As they climb, you can see here, we use little pieces of gear that are made to actually fit into cracks in the rock. And then you thread your rope through that. So if you're to fall, that last piece of protection will catch you. This is the belaying function, where you're below, you're feeding the rope to the lead climber. And you can stop the rope in case they fall to catch them. So Ken and I had this incredible first day, and then at the end of that day, the sun was setting. We climbed up about 500 feet. There was a little ledge there. We made camp for the night. We bedded down. We had a nice little dinner, and it was a very beautiful evening. The stars came out. It was a beautiful moon, and it's a very serene sort of situation. Nice warm weather. We slept very well. Well, early the next morning, powered by our fresh legs and our high spirits, we powered back up the rock. We had more than 1,000 feet to climb to get to the top at this point. So on the second day, we had to go through what's called the crux, which is the most difficult part of the climb. This particular climb had two cruxes. One was crossing through some very fragile rock where you just had to be extremely careful what you put your hands and feet on, otherwise it would break off. We made it through this section, and then we got to the technical crux, which is the most physically difficult climbing. On this climb, it's an overhang. You can see here, it's a section of rock that needs to be climbed under, up, and over. It's one of the hardest things you can do in climbing. Ken set his anchor there, and then he belayed me up to him, and I climbed over this section. It was the most difficult thing I've ever climbed in my whole life, and I made it through, though. But above, I really felt I needed to meditate and get myself back together. And about 15 feet below, Ken said he thought he started to notice that something might not be okay because I was really slowing down at this point. He called out to me to stay strong, keep moving, and I did. Now I'm climbing through some rock at this point that's not that difficult, but very quickly, I get into this precarious position where I feel I need to rest, but I can't climb back down, and it's very difficult above me. So I start to feel my body giving out. My hands, which never sweat, started sweating like crazy. I couldn't get a good foothold. I knew I was going to peel off the rock, and so I yelled out to Ken very loudly what all climbers do, which is falling, and then he braced for me to fall. Took in the rope, and he prepared for impact.
Craig! Oh!
So let's ask the young narrator, Craig, again how he remembers this moment going. Craig? Craig.
Oh my god.
How was that?
Oh my god.
My leg was swelling pretty much immediately. Didn't look good.
My very first thought was, well, I'll just get back up on the rock and start climbing.
Maybe I can stand on it. Let me get up real quick.
Wait on it.
Oh, no. There's no way.
So at this point, we realized that the climb decided how to get out of this. We were very low on food and water, and we realized that very quickly we were in the fight for our lives. So continuing up the rock is impossible. I can't climb any further, so we have no choice but to descend down to the ground and then make this incredibly difficult hike out. It's 1,000 feet down to the ground. Now, on these climbs, there are permanent fixed anchors that are metal drilled into the rock. What we do if you need to get off is you thread your rope through, and then you can descend down the ropes and then pull the rope. This happens about every 100 feet. Well, this first rappel was hellacious. I had never done anything like this in my life. With a shattered leg trying to do this, I went about 5% as fast as I normally could, and every time my foot or my leg hit the rock, I nearly blacked out from the pain. This should have taken us 15 minutes to do this first rappel. It took us 90 minutes to get down. And every rappel after that was just as difficult. It should have taken us about an hour and a half to get to the ground. It took us 8 hours to get to the ground. And a big part of that is that our ropes got stuck several times. So as the sun was setting, it was getting dark, we finally reached the ground. That in itself was a huge accomplishment. And I was so stoked to be down at that point. I thought, well, maybe I should see if my leg is strong enough for the hike out. We've got a long ways to get out. So Ken kind of supported me, and I tried to put weight onto my right foot. If you've ever broken a bone before, I basically broke my leg for the second time at this point. And this was the most excruciating moment of the whole experience. It just kind of scraped and teared along the bone. Well, despite really hot temperatures, Ken and I decided to put our rain suits on. And this is because there was such dense poison ivy, we thought it would be a good idea to try and shield ourselves from the poison ivy with the rain suit. But at this point, we were totally out of food and water. So in retrospect, I don't know if I'd have done the same thing because it made me more dehydrated. As much as Ken could help me, he would, but for the most part, through the night, I was crawling on my hands and knees with a shattered leg. Now, we had several precarious moments, including having to ascend up these sheer walls where there's a rope hanging down. We'd just gotten over one of them, and I was climbing through some very slippery terrain. Right at the edge, I started to slip. Ken grabbed me by the back of my rain jacket, right by the hood. I was holding onto nothing, and my legs were dangling over the edge of this 100-foot drop. If Ken hadn't grabbed the back of my jacket, I would have definitely fallen to my death there. Well, hour after hour, we inched on along the trail, not even sure if we were going the right way sometimes. We would hit a dead end and have to turn back and find a different path. Now, at this point, I'm pretty much on the brink of collapse, and I'm hallucinating quite badly, almost to the point that I couldn't see physically what was in front of me. And then just as I'm feeling like giving out, we heard a faint but unmistakable sound coming from inside a little cave that was nearby.
Wow. It's water.
Yep. I don't know if you've ever been this dehydrated, but one little drop of water is just the greatest thing you've ever tasted in your whole life. It absolutely gave us brand new energy, brought us back to life, and we had what we needed to continue on. Well, we forged on through the night, and 18 hours after the fall, we finally started to reach the canyon rim, and safety was in sight. We knew we were going to live. I like the way Ken describes this moment.
Just elation and just tremendous relief as we emerged out of that canyon. It was a beautiful thing.
It was a beautiful thing. It's like the nighttime was the time of darkness, the time of suffering, the time of blackness in the Black Canyon. And when that was over, that we would come back into the light. So the sunrise really signified the end of the endeavor and that we'd gotten through, that we were going to live. Well, Ken and I made our last mile of hike outside of the canyon. He aided me through this pretty tough terrain. We got to the car and I was so happy to be there. I just threw off my helmet and gave him the biggest hug I've ever given anybody in my whole life. Happy to be alive. Well, Ken rushed me to the nearest hospital, which is in Gunnison, Colorado, where we did learn that my leg was broken in 3 different places. But right after I had my surgery and get my cast on my leg, I'm back climbing again.
Oh,
Can't keep this guy down. What'd you think?
all right.
Wow, huh? Sure is. Well, I have for the newspaper of me climbing with my cast on. And the photographer said, man, that would be incredible. So Ken set up a top rope and I gave it a shot. Actually, Ken took a video while he was doing it. You can see it right here. There is some audio with this. Unless it's gone. No? No? Okay. Well, this is Ken basically saying, with one leg and a heart full of courage, sheer determination and the will to survive. So, after doing this, I had been up on the rock and there was people down below watching us. And their first reactions were, what is going on? Is this guy okay? What's happening? Why would someone climb with a cast on? They were kind of bewildered. And wouldn't you believe it, I made it to the top of the rock safely. I got down safely. And these people's bewilderment went from that to, oh my gosh, I can't believe someone can do this. You can climb with a cast on? It was this look of inspiration and elation. And it got me thinking, everybody since I broke my leg is telling me what I can't do. What can I do? And so life kind of became a game. And the game was, how much can I do with a cast on my leg? Safely. I wouldn't want to injure myself again, but I was in the best shape of my life. I was 19 years old. I wasn't ready to slow down. And so for Ken and I, we continued to find fun, adventurous things to do together, but with my cast on. And we found all kinds of little adventures. This is this is like a zip line going across the river near Boulder, Colorado. I can't remember the name of the river, but I've got my crutches in one hand, my cast on the leg. My buddy John is taking pictures going, what is going on here? But this whole mindset completely changed my brain chemistry, and it changed my physical body. I'll tell you why. I had been offered a job in Europe to play music with a band, and it was going to be just 6 weeks after the cast was put on. And my doctor told me, you have to wear this cast for at least 3 months before I can give you a walking cast. I called him up and I said, I can't take this gig if I go to Europe with a cast on. Can you please put on the walking cast early? And he said, there's no way you're ready for that. I said, please just check it out. Let's see. I came into his office and he examined my leg and he said, have you been seeing a different doctor? Have you had some special treatment I don't know about? I said, why? And he said, because your leg is healed after 6 weeks. We can take the cast off today.
All right.
He said, what have you been doing with yourself? I said, well, I'm not going to tell you all of it. But I've been more or less living like my leg was healed already. And he said to me, this is miraculous. I've read books, I've seen movies about these kinds of stories where people more or less see themselves living in the kind of body that they want to be in, and the body seems to work double time to catch up. And so for both of us, this was this very mind-opening experience to see what the body can do influenced by the mind. It's quite an amazing part of the story. So after only 3 months, I did my gig in Europe. Ken and I got back together. I came back to Colorado and we climbed Rocky Mountain National Park. This is, 3 months after the accident. I had a 100% recovery of my leg, had a great surgeon, and we were right back at it. This was a 1,000-foot climb we did in Rocky Mountain National Park. So Ken and I decided that we still had our sights set on this incredible thing that we originally wanted to accomplish. Remember? We were training for El Capitan. So over the next year, in 2007, Ken and I got right back to it. Right where we left off, we went back to our favorite training places in Utah, in Nevada, and California. And with all this new information and experience we had from our accident, we thought we were absolutely ready to climb El Capitan. So in May of 2007, we headed to Yosemite Valley. And this is a climber's drawing of the nose of El Capitan. I like this because it doesn't show up on there, but in the bottom left corner, there's two shadowy images. One is the Eiffel Tower, and one is the Empire State Building. That gives you a gauge of just how high this climb is. It is the real deal, ladies and gentlemen. So Ken and I thought that we were going to be totally scot-free and have this amazing, easygoing climb on El Capitan after my accident. This is the first day I took this photograph. There was another accident. Luckily, it didn't involve us, but a climber had fallen 80 feet and compound fractured their femur. This helicopter airlifted them off of the nose of El Capitan, and I saw this helicopter bring its chopper blades within a foot of the rock to get this guy off. True heroes. These guys are true heroes. Well, despite this incredibly scary event, we pushed on because we didn't want to be deterred by this frightening first day. And although this scary event overshadowed the whole thing, we still had a great time. And we were totally prepared for everything that laid in front of us. You can see this great smile on my face. An awesome time. The photo on the left, you really get an idea of just how steep and exposed this is. El Capitan is unique because it's shaped like an hourglass where this climb is called the nose. So it's vertical at a ramp, goes straight up, and then it overhangs for the last 500 feet. So the higher you climb, the more you're looking over literally dead space. Well, this is another ledge where we sleep. This is the final place where we slept for the night, making our last push to get to the top on our fourth and final day of climbing. You can see, still got a smile on my face. And after everything I'd been through in the Black Canyon, with shattering my leg, my recovery, another year of training, returning to Yosemite Valley, having this scary first day, 4 days and 3 nights on the rock. Can you believe it? Ken and I reached the summit of El Capitan. We accomplished that. All right. So my life really started to take off at this point because I'd been so inspired by, again, seeing what I was capable of doing. All of these events showed up as these obstacles in my life, sometimes as a handicap, actually. And it started to make me think, anything that's in between me and doing what I want, if I can't do exactly what I want, what can I do with what I have? And so my music career, my athletic career really started to blossom after this time. It was just a year later that I had my first big break in the music business, and I met the saxophonist Kenny G. You guys know Kenny G, right? Yeah. So I wanted to share with you the very first time we played together. This has got audio with it. This is Kenny and I at the Miami Jazz Festival. Look at that hair. Pretty cool, right?
Oh, good.
Thank you. So, after that, I got turned on to a television show. It's called American Ninja Warrior. Any fans of the show?
Yeah.
Hey, all right. So I tried out for the show in 2016, and if you're not familiar with it, it's an extreme obstacle competition on television. It's all around the world, but the most famous version is in America. In 2016, I did quite well, But in 2017, I actually became a national finalist. I was one of the final competitors that went all the way to Las Vegas.
All
There's a
right.
picture I wanted to share with you. It's me on the
Oh.
salmon ladder at the finals.
That's hard.
Those veins sticking out of my arm. The look on my face is somewhere between sheer determination and sheer horror, I think. It's very difficult, very, very fun. And I put together a little montage video here for you next so you can get an idea of what the sport is like.
So don't you dare look back, just keep your eyes on me. I said you're holding back, she said shut up and dance with me. This woman is my destiny. She said, ooh, shut up and dance with me.
Ooh.
Human flying squirrel. Some of these are so precise, if you don't hit it directly, you won't make it.
Oh.
Yep, tough stuff. A lot of swinging through the air, which I find very fun. It's called the warped wall. It's like running up the side of a building.
Oh. Ooh.
And here's the salmon ladder in action.
Mm.
Yeehaw!
Oh.
Here's the flying salmon ladder.
Yeah.
Woo!
Oh.
Pretty cool, huh? That's American Ninja Warrior for you.
All right. Ooh.
You bet. Well, I want to talk for a little bit about an event that really changed my life in the world for about 10 years. After climbing El Capitan to 2017, I didn't have a lot of really challenging moments in my life. Typical drama like anybody, but I wasn't really tested that hard. And then in 2017, it was actually the night of the Las Vegas National Finals. Right as I went to go do my final run, my body just quit. I all of a sudden felt my muscles just full of pain and electricity, it felt like. I started to feel really heavy. My vision was blurry. I couldn't think straight. And so on my run at the national finals, I made, I think, to the fourth obstacle, and then I just fell flat on my face. And this was a very scary time for me because overnight, I just completely lost my health. And I started going to different doctors to find out what was wrong with me. But after every test they could think of to do, 3 different doctors had no idea what was wrong with me. I didn't know it at the time, but I contracted Lyme disease. So Lyme disease is this very elusive illness. It's difficult to diagnose, and doctors today are still really in the dark about this. They're trying to make sense of it. And during this time, because I'd been so high for so long, I was in the best shape of my life again. Just was on TV, having a great, amazing time. I went from that to the absolute bottom. I totally lost everything. I didn't feel like I could participate in life anymore. This whole thing with not being able to think straight, I felt like it took away my reason for living, which is to be present, to be part of life, to pay attention, to be in the moment. I felt if I can't even do that, what's the point of being here? I kind of felt like a vegetable. And for that reason, I contemplated suicide for the first time.
Mm.
I'd never known anything like this kind of darkness before. I went home to be with my family in Colorado Springs, and I was sitting with my father in our hot tub one morning. I'd been crying. And I said to my dad, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, and I don't know how to get out of it. My father said, this is probably going to be hard for you to hear, but don't you tell people in these presentations you do that no matter what happened in the Black Canyon, you refused to take no for an answer, you wouldn't give up, and you crawled your way back to the light, and how that's a metaphor for life. I said, yeah, Dad, but how do I get out of this? My father, who was a psychologist, he said, I know for a fact the power of the mind, and you've seen what the body can do when you make up your mind with your recovery. How is this any different? So this time, I had to walk my talk when it really mattered because I was at the end of my rope. I was ready to give up. And I thought, well, I want to live, so it's worth a try. And I used that same system I used when I had the cast on my leg. I made my life a game. And the game this time was, how can I still have a good day? How can I still want to live despite this thing? Even if I never figure it out, how can I still have joy in my life?
Mm.
After changing my attitude and finding what I could do with what I had, I started to feel a lot better quite quickly.
Mm.
And because I didn't give up looking for someone to help me find an answer, I got turned on to a specialist in Atlanta, Georgia. They're called Longevity Health. And they knew that I had Lyme disease. They knew how to treat it. The guy said, if you're ready to go, I know exactly what's wrong. I know how to help. After a very intensive 3-month treatment, I got that out of my body before it became chronic or lifelong. And because I didn't give up, I am here with you to tell my story today.
All right. Woo!
Well, I want to share one more video with you here. This is back in the Garden of the Gods. My father had always told me growing up, you've done all these great things in climbing, but I've always got one up on you. My dad's very competitive, by the way. He said, when I was 30 years old, I went to the Garden of the Gods, and I climbed once with a blindfold on. So there. When I'd gone home to be with my family, when I was absolutely sick with Lyme disease, I had a day where I was feeling pretty good. And I said, Dad, let's go to the garden. We were out there climbing, and I thought to myself, what could be crazier than the way I feel now and trying to do your big thing? Here it is.
Mm.
I am on top rope, which means that if I'm going to fall, that I will be caught immediately and I won't get hurt. So it's a very safe way to climb. Wouldn't you believe it, Dad? I made it all the way to the top. With a blindfold on. But this is my favorite part of the video. Look at my face. Does this look like the face of someone who's in despair? So when people ask me, why did you climb with a cast on? Why did you climb when you were sick with Lyme disease? Why did you continue doing adventurous things? I'll tell you why. Because they're my love, my passion, my bliss. If you're familiar with a great philosopher, writer named Joseph Campbell, he has a great quote where he said, follow your bliss and doors will open where there were only walls before.
Mm.
I truly believe that. Every time I've gone to a dark place in my life, there's been 3 things that always have brought me back to the light. Number 1, ask for help. Ask for help, ask for help. This is the time when I think about the people in my life who've got my back, my support system, people that I know will be there for me no matter what. For me, that's my mother and father. So I went back to Colorado Springs every time I needed them. Number 2 is be in a safe space. Detach from all the stress in my life, let it go, and be in a safe space. For me, that was being home. And also going to my power spots. This is the Garden of the Gods behind me. This is a very good reason I had my picture taken there. It's the center of my universe. So for me, it's about going to those places I feel safe, I feel inspired. And number 3 is doing what I love. It's the most important thing for me in life. I feel like my life has been magical because I've followed my passion. I wish that for every single one of you. We all want to make a difference in the world, and I feel like I keep getting reminded that one of the best ways I can make a difference is by doing what makes me come alive, what lights me up, because that's when we really influence each other and bring more joy into the world. Well, we're going to wrap up here, and before we do, I want you to give a round of applause for our production team. Thank you so much for this. This is by Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman was a civil rights activist, and he said, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is more people who have come alive. My name is Craig Richard. Thank you so much for being here today. God bless everybody. Thank you.
It's the story of Holland America Lion. So let's start with the Holland part. Now, This is the Netherlands, and I know it can be a little bit confusing, but saying the Netherlands isn't really the same as just saying Holland, because Holland is actually a province. Well, technically it's two provinces, North and South Holland. So, why Holland America Line? Well, because of this. Now, this is Rotterdam, a city in, you guessed it, South Holland. Today, it's by far the busiest port in Europe and one of the largest ports in the world.
The Netherlands is, of course, located perfectly in Europe as a gateway to Europe, we like to say, because the rivers go through to Germany, Belgium, France, and the whole of Eastern Europe.
Rotterdam is situated in a natural delta, and that means as a port, it caters to somewhat 350 million people. Until this day, trade comes into the port of Rotterdam, either in containers or goods, break bulk, and is then sort of divided into smaller portions and then taken upriver.
More than 100,000 ships pass through the port of Rotterdam, representing nearly 50 billion euros of value for the Netherlands every year. 50. And just for perspective, that's 6% of the gross domestic product of the country, all from these 41 square miles of port. But in the late 1800s, none of this was here. See, Rotterdam was a tiny city with a bit of a problem. The river mouth was very shallow, and if a ship wanted to come into Rotterdam, it had to take a long detour through canals and rivers. It added days to the journey, which wasn't good for business. So, a group of entrepreneurs got together and they hatched a plan. They dredged the river and make a new waterway to the sea, and it was a game changer.
In those days, we had what we call the havenbaronnen, the port barons as we call them, entrepreneurs, people who were looking for opportunities, and Anthony Platen, Lodewijk Pincoffs, and Otto Reuglin. They started the North American Shipping Company.
Now, they formed the company in 1873 and called it this. Now, for any of our guests who don't speak Dutch, if you want to give this one a try, the Nederlands-Amerikaanse Stoomboot-Maatschappij. Oh, close enough. Actually, in Dutch, the I and the J together is sort of pronounced how a Y is pronounced in English. Now, our first ship was called, of course, Rotterdam, and we painted her smokestacks the colours of the city, green and white. Now, the Rotterdam was built in Scotland and cost 30,000 guilders, millions and millions of dollars today. Now, she was supposed to have this big, splashy debut, but there was a strike at the shipyard and she arrived 6 months late. Now, because of that delay, her first voyage was a little bit light. She only carried 70 passengers. It was an inauspicious start for our company. And actually, our first 20 years weren't, let's say, spectacular. And a lot of that came down to our name. See, it was hard to sell tickets in America on the Nederlands-Amerikaanse Stoomboot-Maatschappij. And everyone was sort of already calling us something else anyway. So we did what these days you'd call a rebranding, and we went from this to this. And that was really the last time we were behind the curve. And by just a few years later, we'd already taken over 1,000 trips with nearly 500,000 passengers. And things were only going to get better. Holland America Line was about to join one of the largest movements of people in the history of the world. Now, for as long as America has been America, people have traveled from far away to make a new life in the United States. Before Holland America came around, it was expensive, it was difficult, and it was often extremely dangerous. Now, in the early 1800s, before our steamships, the voyage across the Atlantic was pretty miserable.
Immigration from, of course, the point of view from the Netherlands started in the 1830s. Sometimes they sailed as regular passengers with their own cabin, but most of them didn't have a lot of money because poverty was a reason to migrate, and they stayed in between decks. So they didn't have their own cabin, they just stayed in whatever bed was provided for them.
Those tween decks, or what you might know as steerage, where most of the immigrants traveled, were often tiny and extremely uncomfortable. Often they were only 5 feet tall. Now that passage could take almost a month, and the conditions were often miserable. By the time our steamships came around, things had gotten a little bit better, the trip was shorter, but the conditions on the other liners was still pretty terrible. And yet here's the thing, nearly 11 million people immigrated to the United States in steerage, so we had to figure out how to get some of those passengers. And look, it wasn't going to be easy. Competition was ferocious, especially because the other companies were, well, let's just say they're a little willing to play fast and loose with the truth.
Cost $10 to cross from Rotterdam to New York. $10 to an immigrant in the beginning of the 20th century was a lot of money. And they wanted the voyage that was safe and reliable. Immigrants were poor people, basically. They didn't go to travel agents, they didn't study brochures, but they'd go down to the railway station or the pub or the post office, and they would see these giant posters of liners going to America. So word spread that a ship with 2 smokestacks was safer than a ship with 1 smokestack. But a ship with 3 smokestacks was even safer. There's no correlation between smokestacks and safety, but they would look at the posters and count the smokestacks in the posters and pick that ship to spend their $10 on. Well, companies, thankfully Holland America didn't do it, used to add fake smokestacks to their ships so they would have more stacks on the top so the immigrants would go on their ship, so they called them dummy smokestacks. The second big story of that era, the immigrants had heard that if they ate raw onions for a month before they left Europe, they wouldn't get seasick. Total fallacy. There's no correlation between raw onions and seasickness.
Okay, first of all, we'd all appreciate it if you don't try that raw onion cure on board. Science has offered us plenty of methods to treat seasickness that won't make you a social outcast here on board. But the point is this, Holland America Line had to figure out how to get those immigrants on board our ships. And again, we weren't the fastest, we weren't the biggest, and we certainly weren't the cheapest. And we definitely weren't going to cheat by adding fake smokestacks to our ships. But despite all of that competition, eventually 1 out of every 10 immigrants who traveled steerage to the United States did so on a Holland America Line ship. 1 out of every 10. And you know why? We treated those immigrants like human beings deserve to be treated. And it all started at home in Rotterdam.
So here we're actually at the Wilhelmina Kade, but at this side it's called Holland America Quay. And this is the main street, you can say, in Rotterdam. So basically, where we're at, this square kilometer is the history of Holland America Line. Just on the opposite side, you have the Royal Yacht Club, where actually the deed, when it was started, the company, was signed, dined, and wined. If you walk a little bit up along the quay, you will find Hotel New York, which was the original head office of Holland America Line. And I have heard so many stories of people going there, trembling knees, and how happy they were when they finally got on board.
That building, which served as both our offices and terminal, is really where it all started. You can still see our name on the facade. Now downstairs, immigrants came to purchase their tickets and get ready for their long journey. Actually, the baggage area is now a really nice restaurant with an amazing view. Upstairs were the offices, and today there's still a few rooms that are named after our company's founders. Now, after the migrants purchased their tickets, they'd wait for the ship to arrive to take them to America. Sometimes they'd wait a few hours, but usually they waited for days and days.
When they stayed in Rotterdam, up till the 1890s, they mostly went, or I think all of them went to private boarding houses. And in the earlier days, the people of the boarding houses, well, they were not that fair in the prices people had to pay. And people like Plate and Heuglen, who were the founders of the Holland America Line, also saw this. So at the end of the 19th century, they built their own emigrant hotel.
They built it just a few blocks from our head offices, and it was a huge part of the reason they were so successful in those early days, because this was much more than just a hotel. We had a kosher kitchen, there were English lessons, classes on American civics, and doctors and nurses who checked for lice and diseases. And when the immigrants finally got on board, they found something that was totally different from our competition. First, we did away with steerage class altogether, renaming it emigrants class, where unlike our competition, we served 3 square meals in an actual mess hall to every passenger. For example, here's a menu from the turn of the century. Looks pretty good, right? Let's take a look at Monday. We've got sauerkraut, smoked bacon, potatoes, plum duff, anyone? Sort of like a Yorkshire pudding, but our first class passengers, they had it even better. Oysters in the half shell, seared duck. Now, by the way, I don't know if you noticed this, but this ship was called Potsdam. We've repeated a lot of ship names in our history, but there's never been another Potsdam. It works in Dutch, but I guess it didn't quite sound right in English. Now, offering 3 square meals in the dining room, it might seem like a small thing, but it was actually this massive innovation because it meant that 3 times a day, rain or shine, those passengers could leave their quarters and their rooms could be cleaned. Now, very quickly, we got the nickname the Spotless Fleet. And this wasn't just about being tidy. Everything from the doctors at our hotel to the cleanliness on board our ships was all about getting passengers to New York in a healthy condition, because healthy passengers made it through Ellis Island.
Just south of where I am right now is Ellis Island, the great immigration station, where from 1892 to 1924, 18 million people passed through. Now, the immigrants were not allowed to come up to the piers of New York. The ship had to drop anchor south of here in the lower bay, and they would take them off in barges, tenders, or ferries, and all the third-class steerage passengers would go directly to Ellis Island, where beginning at about 9 in the morning, they would be processed by gruff customs and immigration people and doctors known as 30-second specialists as they hooked under eyelids and poked into ears looking for diseases. They were processed, and many of them were cleared by noon, would catch a ferry over to Manhattan or even here to Jersey City and start working in a factory the same afternoon in a prearranged job. They wanted to be Americans quickly. They wanted the idea that the streets were paved with gold. You could make your riches in America.
By the way, if a passenger was rejected at Ellis Island, you know who had to pay for the return voyage? We did. But that's only a small part of why we did all of this. The main reason was that people that made it through told their friends and relatives about us. Almost 99% of the immigrants that we carried on our Spotless Fleet were cleared at Ellis Island. Now, word spread about our fine service on board and business was exploding, and so it was time for us to build our first luxury liner, the New Amsterdam. Now, I could talk all about her, but I'm going to let the New York Times do the honors.
The New Holland America liner, New Amsterdam, reached Hoboken after her late passage across the Atlantic yesterday afternoon. The ship, which is the largest flying the Dutch flag, as well as the best passenger vessel yet built for the New York-Rotterdam trade, resembles outwardly the other Holland America ships. There is a Dutch smoking room, a Japanese tea room. The social hall is furnished in the Empire style and will surely be one of the most popular apartments on the new ship.
It was a really great first review. Now, by the way, you might notice that the original New Amsterdam had masts. It never used sails, but they put masts on the ship to assure worried immigrants that the ship was safe and sound. Sort of our version of those dummy smokestacks. But it worked. Immigrants flocked to Holland America Line, and the stories are endless. Johnny Weissmuller, the original Olympic athlete and very first Tarzan, he immigrated to the United States on Rotterdam 3. Herbert Hoover, Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn, Clark Gable, Deborah Carr, and Louis Armstrong, they all traveled on Holland America Line ships. And hey, we can even take credit for some of the greatest comedies of the last 50 years. Billy Crystal's grandfather emigrated on one of our ships. So without us, Harry would have never met Sally, there'd be no city slickers, so you're welcome. But of course, there's also this recognizable fellow.
Oh.
He traveled to the United States for the very first time on board one of our ships, the Rotterdam. The fourth Rotterdam, the flagship of our fleet, and our very first ship of state. Now, Rotterdam 4 was built in 1908, and she was amazing. She was the largest ever Dutch ship, and she was the official seagoing palace of the Royal Dutch government. Sort of the Dutch version of the SS France or the Queen Mary. She was also the first ocean liner in the world to have a glass-enclosed promenade deck. Now, that might not seem like a big deal, but it would actually be 4 more years before another ship had such a modern and forward-looking feature. And that ship was the Titanic. Now, actually, the Titanic is part of our story in more ways than one. In 1912, when White Star Line launched the Titanic, one of our founders sent his son George to scout this new ship. He dined with the ship's designers, he met with officials from White Star Line, and he sent telegrams to the captain of the Nordam, a Holland America ship, that was crossing the Atlantic just ahead of the Titanic. Now, the captain of the Nordam actually warned him of the ice ahead, and if you listen carefully in the film, you can hear our ship being mentioned. But, of course, it was no help. Our founder's son was among the 1,500 that perished on that tragic voyage. But tragedy wouldn't stop us. World War I didn't stop us, or immigration quotas, not even prohibition. We just continued to do what we'd always done, and we found a way to think differently.
In 1929, Wall Street crashed, and the passenger ship industry to Europe plummeted by 50%. A million people crossed in 1930, 500,000 5 years later. So Holland America, like all the companies, was hemorrhaging money. So in America, we had prohibition. You couldn't drink. So they developed an idea of one-night cruises for $10, where you would sail from New York at 5 p.m. You would get to the 3-mile limit at 7 p.m. They could open up the bars legally because they were past the 3-mile limit. Americans could drink themselves through the whole night and hopefully be sober enough to walk ashore the next morning. $10 booze cruises. Cruising was like Hollywood movies in the 30s. It was a form of escapism. So Holland America emphasized the nutrients in sea air. It would calm the nerves. You'd worry less about your financial troubles. You'll come back renewed.
Now, our approach to prohibition was actually so successful that despite the Great Depression, we built our most luxurious ship ever, New Amsterdam II, still considered to be, along with the Normandy of France, one of the most beautiful ships ever built. Again, I'm going to let the New York Times handle this one.
British observers who landed at Southampton after making the overnight journey to inspect the ship were deeply impressed with her, not only as the most modern thing in marine architecture, but also as a distinct and unique achievement in art. The New Amsterdam is the greatest ship ever to come out of Holland, and those who have seen her predict that she will produce a sensation in New York unlike that of any other vessel in the North Atlantic trade.
Sensation really was the perfect word for New Amsterdam II. She was our very first ship to feature something called ocean liner design. See, before New Amsterdam II, our ships looked like, well, home. They had dark interiors with fireplaces and heavy fabrics. You were supposed to feel like you were on shore at a Dutch villa, not actually out at sea. But with New Amsterdam II, we tried something different.
It was Art Deco at sea. It was magnificent. It had everything right about it. It was floating ginger arches with sleek stainless banisters and ebony and modern decor. Out went the chocolate rooms and the heavy carpets. She was instantly one of the most popular ships. In fact, she was dubbed the ship of tomorrow because she was so modern inside.
With New Amsterdam II, we even revolutionized the entertainment on board. See, in the early days, our lounges featured a piano for guests to play like in the parlors of the old country. But that was the onboard entertainment. A few drinks and the hope that someone else crossing the Atlantic with you would be able to play a few popular songs. Well, we still do the few drinks part, but now we provide the piano player, and that all started on New Amsterdam II. It even had an entire theatre. New Amsterdam had performances from all kinds of artists, and fast forward 100 years, we went from this to this. The past was gone, and the ocean liner was the future. But less than a year after New Amsterdam II made her very first voyage, everything changed.
2 days after Germany's surprise attack on Poland, France and England have declared war on the Nazis. With widespread fighting imminent, countless civilians are left to wonder, where will we go that is safe?
My parents smuggled themselves, literally smuggled themselves across the Polish border in early '39.
We arrived at the Rotterdam train station around midnight on the 25th of March, without any money at all. We spent 2 weeks in Rotterdam waiting for the ship to sail. Finally, one evening in early April, we boarded our ship. For the first 3 days, our vessel threaded her way carefully across the English Channel to avoid the mines.
It was tense all the way. There were frequent rumors of U-boats and of turning back to Europe. At night, the ship was blacked out, dark. The potholes had been painted over, drapes and curtains were drawn by late afternoon, and only low wattage bulbs were used in the lounges and in the cabins.
We were in the English Channel, and the war had started. And the ship turned out all the lights, and we laid all night in the English Channel because of fear of submarines. And then the next day we started the trip to New York, and partway through the trip we saw the ocean all around us was covered with logs. There was a Canadian lumber ship that had been torpedoed by the Germans, and we picked up the survivors.
On the day we finally rounded Land's End and headed out into the open Atlantic, the ship's radio brought us the news of Hitler's surprise attack.
Rotterdam was bombed. The whole of the city center was bombed. Around 850 people lost their lives. Around 20,000 people lost their home, which is a lot. And also, the harbor, the port was bombed.
During that bombardment, one of our largest ships, the Statendam, was hit. In the midst of this destruction, this symbol of our company burned and burned for days and days.
A lot of people were emotional about it. That the Statendam was it was burning, and they tried to save it, but they couldn't. The whole city center of Rotterdam was burning. I mean, 30,000 buildings were gone. You can't imagine how it must have been for people to live in the city at that moment. All those people having no homes, the fire, there was no water. Everything was broken. It must have been awful.
The Dutch government had wanted to be neutral, but now they just had no choice. The war had come to the Netherlands, so they called on the Dutch ships of state to join the war effort. New Amsterdam, too, our most luxurious ship yet, was to become a military vessel. Now she steamed to Halifax, where her military conversion began. From there, she went to Singapore, where her millions of dollars of furniture and art were placed into storage. And on December 22nd, 1940, she entered service.
At the outbreak of World War II, I was in South Africa.
That's Cecil Renfield. When we interviewed him, he was 97 years old. He joined the Navy in South Africa and was transferred to the British Royal Navy to join the battle for Europe. The only way he could get home to fight was on board New Amsterdam.
Before the war, I was a cabin boy on the old Orient line, and I knew a lot about merchant ships. And I knew about the New Amsterdam was, I would say, the pride of Holland in those days. Wow, it was the biggest ship I'd ever seen or ever been on. When we got on board that troop ship, it was packed. We were packed like sardines. If you lifted your head up, you cracked your head on the bunk above you.
All of these troop carriers, they were just extremely crowded, and New Amsterdam was no different. Before the war, she could carry a little more than 1,200 passengers. But during the war, at her capacity, she held over 8,000 troops at a time. Even the swimming pool was filled with enough bunks for 300 soldiers. And despite these cramped conditions, New Amsterdam maintained that world-famous Holland America service. For example, while most troop carriers only managed 2 hot meals a day, soldiers traveling aboard New Amsterdam was treated to 3 square meals. And the amount of food needed to feed these soldiers was frankly mind-boggling. Every single day, the ship's kitchens went through 240 gallons of milk, 80 bags of flour, over 12,000 eggs, 1,000 pounds of bacon, 14,000 loaves of bread, and when lamb stew was served, it was 110 whole lambs needed. And when beef brisket was on the menu, it took 4,000 pounds of beef in a day. Now, by the way, just for comparison, these days, we use about 5,000 fewer eggs each day. But on the other hand, we have way more seafood and ice cream and a lot more booze, so it balances out. But it's funny, what Cecil remembers